Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to share this report with you and some of my findings, and I can see so many familiar faces, some of who participated in this research. So I wanted to start by saying thank you to the Data Poverty Lab, to Nominet and Good Things for giving us this opportunity. It's incredible. And thank you to everyone who contributed and participated, especially the people with lived experience who shared their insight. It was just incredible. Yeah, I have so much to share with you guys, but I promise I'm going to try and keep it succinct. So I'm going to introduce the work that I'm doing. Yes, you've already heard about the Data Poverty Lab. It's a collaboration between Good Things and Nominet, and this was launched in 2021 to find solutions to data poverty. And what I'm doing is one of 3 fellowships. There's 2 other fellowships with 3 people involved. So keep your eye out for those. They're really exciting topics. They're going to be launched in the future. This is just one of a series, and I cannot wait to hear their insights as well. And this is work that I did over 3 months in the summer of 22. I interviewed about 85 different people. I visited communities across the UK, finding solutions to data poverty and looking at ways that we can scale them. And it was honestly one of the most exciting things I've ever done. It's such an interesting topic. I got really stuck into it. I learned how to lay fibre cables and build cabinets in Lancashire, and I interviewed people from food banks. I interviewed policymakers, people from telecommunications companies. It was such a variety of experience. And what I'm going to take you through today are some really key headlines of what I think are the most interesting findings. And then also bits of the report that I think you might be interested in and tools that you might want to use. So the report's going to be, it's online at the moment, and you can find it on the Good Things website. You'll get a link for that. And it's got a guide up front that says if you're working in a local authority, if you're working for a charity, if you're a policymaker, these are the bits that you might be interested in, so which will help you navigate through it. And that's the whole point of this project, right? I wanted to provide something useful to people throughout the sector. I'm going to present some stuff to you for about 15 minutes or so. And then what I really want is to hear what you think about it. Put comments in the chat. We're going to have a bit of a Q&A. We've got some people responding, some experts in the audience after I've spoken. So please keep it interactive. Let me know what you're thinking. I really want to hear your thoughts throughout. So my North Star, that everyone has the internet access they need. So this fellowship is looking for solutions to data poverty. That's what this report is focused on. But data poverty is a really wide-ranging set of ideas and issues, and there's a kind of call at the moment generally for a more focused definition. I used Nesta's definition. There's a few different definitions that I explored in my desktop research, which you can have a look at in the report. But I love Good Things Foundation's overall strategy focus, which is that everyone has the internet access they need, and that's what I'm using as a guiding point throughout this work. So top insight number 1. And this was something that I was surprised by, that data poverty doesn't look like what data-rich people imagine. So one of the things that I really took away from this work is that it's really easy to picture data poverty or internet poverty as somebody who is maybe quite elderly, in their 70s or 80s, who doesn't really use a computer. And that's the sort of image that often springs to mind. But in the UK now, there's over 2 million people who don't have good access. Over 10 million people are struggling with their bills. And particularly with the cost of living crisis, what we're seeing is that people are weighing up their rent, their food, their bills, and they're cutting off their broadband or their mobile phone. So this is a wide-ranging issue that affects lots of different people. It's also geographically affected. So the coverage between urban and rural areas is very different. And even in inner city London, there are areas of not spots where there isn't good internet coverage. So I think what this really brought out is that it's not necessarily an older person in an internet cafe. What it can be is a young 15-year-old sharing their phone with a sibling. It could be a young mum who stopped at a chicken shop or outside a bank to use the free Wi-Fi, or it can be somebody who's a job seeker who's just really struggling to pay their bill. This is one of my favorite quotes from the research that I did. This is from a research participant with lived experience of internet poverty or data poverty. And I asked a lot of people, what do you use the internet for? I asked you guys as you came in, what do you use the internet for? What do you use it for most? And often the answer is everything. I use it for everything. And this quote, I think, really brings that to life. It's like everybody's third arm now, isn't it, the internet? And if you've lost that third arm, what do you do? Now, I think this is a really difficult concept to encapsulate, right? And I think as I interviewed people, we'd go through, well, what do you use it for? I use it for, Netflix, I do some online shopping, or I do my banking. And as we talked, they'd be surprised and I'd be surprised by how much they were using the internet for. It is part of everything that we do. But I also felt this really strong need to communicate that, like, how do we explain everything in a way that is meaningful, that really tells the stories of people who are struggling to access the internet and the actual impact that has on their daily life. And that's where, as Tom mentioned, the periodic table of internet elements came from. So if you take one thing away from today, I'd love you to take a look at this graphic. It's up on the Good Things website. I know a lot of people have fed back that it's a very helpful graphic. And I think what it's trying to do is to encapsulate like the breadth of what the internet is used for. So you can see along the top, you've got different categories of what we use it for. You've got housing, you've got government services, education, work, creativity. And then underneath, you've got examples of this. And this is not exhaustive. The internet is used for a huge amount of different things. But what you will see on here are examples of things that you use the internet for, probably things like email, things like news, things like maybe getting prescriptions online. But there's also lots of things on here that are disproportionately affect people who are affected by data poverty. So things like immigration services, things like claiming universal credit, things like social housing applications. And what this is doing is attempting to bring to life what I think a lot of digital poverty and data poverty experts sort of know instinctively, and actually what a lot of people more widely know instinctively, but communicate it in a simple and easy way. And that brings me on to the kind of headline insight that I want to share with you before we look at some of the solutions to this. And that's lack of access to the online world prevents access to real world services and interactions. So in the UK today, if you walk into a bank, and this was an example that one of the participants gave me, he said, you walk into a bank now and it's like the Marie Celeste. You can't find anybody. And if you can find them, they tell you to do it online. And it's true of lots of different elements that if you call up your GP, they'll tell you to look at your prescriptions or your appointments online. If you work, a lot of this is hybrid working now, as we're doing right now. If you're involved in some kind of educational activity, a lot of that work is delivered or received online. And that lack of access to this really prevents people accessing the real world. It's not just excluding you from the online world, it's excluding you from the offline world as well. And this is beautifully encapsulated by Simeon Yates, who's a digital poverty expert with Liverpool University at the moment. Says if it costs you £40 a month to get access to the NHS isn't free anymore. And I think that's a wonderful way to summarize what this issue presents. So my top insights. There's an exec summary which goes into a little bit of detail on these, and then you can dig into them. Nice bedtime reading for you in the more detailed report. But I'm going to whiz you through my top 5 insights. So 1, that data poverty excludes people from access to essential services and participating in UK society. 2, that this is a circular element of social inequality. So if you are facing some form of social disadvantage, not having access to the internet deepens that inequality, and it also means you're less likely to have access itself. So this becomes circular. And I think data poverty is best understood, not as a separate issue, but as a part of social inequality. Affordability and accessibility is a central challenge. There's a huge spotlight on affordability at the moment, particularly with the cost of living crisis, and it is absolutely essential that we look at it in focus. I think what's less looked at is accessibility. If you have a complex life, ringing up your broadband provider and trying to negotiate your bill down can feel much more intimidating and difficult, particularly if English isn't your first language, than if you have a less complex life. And this accessibility element of how you switch tariffs, of how you get a different way to access the internet is a really key part of this work. The more positive part, strong solutions to data poverty exist in the UK and some are ripe for scaling. I cannot tell you how inspiring it was to visit people across the country who are passionate and dedicated and are finding solutions. And there is so much goodwill and collaboration in the sector. I was astounded and impressed, and I loved capturing this. There are over 20 case studies in the report. If you're flicking through, read the quotes, read the case studies, are the most interesting bit. Examples of where organizations and individuals and communities have come together to find solutions to this. And what I'm trying to do throughout this project is work out which ones are most ripe for scaling to reach the most number of people. And then lastly, community-led solutions can only be understood and scaled within the context of a wider ecosystem. So my task was to find community-led solutions to be scaled. And as I was doing this, what I encountered is that there is a much wider ecosystem of industry, communities, government, and individuals that make up access to the internet. And we have to understand these solutions within that context. We'll get into that a bit later. The pointless triangle. This is one of Chris's favorites. So you'll have seen this in numerous different forms. Sometimes it's a three-legged stool. But the point is basically that data poverty has to be understood in the wider context of digital exclusion. So data is pointless without skills, is pointless without devices, is pointless without data. And all of these things are underpinned by motivation and confidence. So you have to take all of this report with a big caveat that says yes, but you have to look at it within the wider context of digital inclusion. And all of the recommendations are based within that knowledge as well. So this is tool number one for you guys. So if you're in a local community right now and you're thinking about weighing up different options of how you get people access to the internet, what I've created is a framework. Now, this framework is about how you get people with complex lives or some kind of social disadvantage. It's a way of weighing up the interventions available to you and deciding which one is most appropriate. It is not how to provide good internet or what the qualities of good internet are. You'll see on the right-hand side of this slide that there are other frameworks that do that very well. I didn't try and repeat it. What this is instead doing is thinking, well, if we're looking at bringing in some form of solution, is it appropriate to the people we're supporting? So the top one up here is portability. If someone is fleeing domestic violence, or they have an unstable housing situation, or they're seeking asylum, having fixed internet to a house is not always that helpful because they need to take the internet with them when they move on. Similarly, lots of people facing some kind of complex social situation have financial difficulties. So it needs to be affordable, but it's also really helpful if you can pause it, like a gym membership, if you can pause your internet access. And there are organizations that do that. Similarly, it needs to be good quality. It needs to be quick to access. Plug and play is my way of describing anyone who's got low digital skills or a lack of confidence in the digital skills. Something you can plug in and get on with straight away is much more valuable than something with a complex setup. So the point of this framework is to look at the current solutions available, but I also hope that this can be used in future. Technology moves at pace. There is so much being developed at the moment, and I'm hopeful that this will enable us to look at future solutions and weigh up how useful it is to the wider population, but more importantly to people facing some kind of social inequality, which means they're more likely to be affected by data poverty. Now, I know this is a lot of boxes. This tool is, again, something to go away and have a look at. It's a quick overview of what is brought out more in depth in the report. So you'll see on the left-hand side on the column, the vertical column, we've got the different types of solutions to data poverty. And there are case studies in the report that bring these to life a bit more. And then along the top, you've got the different qualities of that framework I just showed you. And this is giving you a quick fire sense that some of them are private spatially, but maybe not so affordable, or some of them are decent quality, but they're not plug and play. And it gives you a sense, if you're weighing up these options, what the trade-off is that you can engage with. And again, this is an evolving picture. Maybe as some of these change, this will be updated, but this provides a quick fire framework as a snapshot in 2022. So my top 3 interventions, drum roll, please. So I looked at different range of interventions, and what I was thinking about when I was looking at these, and there's the pros and cons are weighed up in each, of what has impact right now, what's going to help the 2 million people who are struggling to get online right now, and what is future-proof, what helps us think to the future. And that was a really important part of this work. We used the Third Horizons framework, thinking about like, what does the future look like in a world where everyone is digitally included, and what would help us get there? But also thinking, how do we address this issue now, especially during a cost of living crisis? So it's in the left, the Wi-Fi in a box is but the most immediate solution that I think has some elements of long-term sustainability. Social tariffs is somewhere in the middle, and then community fibre providers is the most long-term. And I'm going to take you through these quickly. There's a bit more text in the next few slides. Don't worry too much about this. These are headlines. Please feel free to go back through the report. It's all nice and hyperlinked so you can find your way through it. And also the case studies are probably the best bit to read because they bring it to life. So Wi-Fi in a box. Wi-Fi in a box is a device which has a SIM card in it, which provides Wi-Fi in the building that you're in, normally someone's home. And one of the great things about this is that you don't have to install fibre cables or copper cables under the ground to get you that internet. You can give a box to somebody, they can plug it into the mains or charge up the battery, and they instantly have internet. And that's great if you've got a complex life and you need internet quickly. You can take it with you if you move house, and it provides internet to a whole household. And there are some brilliant examples of this. It provides a private connection. It offers something that is, like I say, very quick to access. And a lot of these are distributed via charities or third sector organisations. There's been some great examples. Scotland actually distributed about 60,000 of these during the pandemic. And it's a very quick and accessible way to get people online. My suggestions for scaling it, as headlines are things like we could evolve the National Data Bank. There's some existing organisations, so Heart of Power, Jangala, both brilliant examples of this, where they've actually evolved the tech in a really impressive way to make it as accessible as possible. And I think that you could scale these up by adoption by local authorities. I'm going to give you one example, that there are more in the report. This is Heart of Power in Hartlepool. You can see on the left, the day I visited, it was a really sunny day. I was lucky. And you can see on the right, I took a quick shot of their Wi-Fi in a box. This is what it looks like. It gets posted to your house or given out to you in a community centre. And they actually had a stack of these in a local community cafe. So when a woman came in who presented as a domestic violence survivor, they could give her it straight away. There's no eligibility criteria. There's no difficult process. It's quite an easy setup. There are some issues around data allowances and some people feeling confident even plugging it in. You have to put it up near a window. For the most part, this offers a really strong opportunity for local people to get connected. And Heart of Power have reached over 1,000 people doing this. It's £20 a month. They get philanthropic funding to fund the box. I was super impressed, and I really encourage you to check out both Jangala and Heart of Power's examples. Second recommendation, social tariffs. So for the digital poverty experts in the room, this is a hotly debated issue. Social tariffs are really current at the moment. And a social tariff, for anyone that doesn't know, is an affordable tariff for people claiming benefits in the UK. So it's something that's available to you if you're claiming universal credit, and sometimes if you're claiming another form of benefit. It's a really good way to get someone a private connection to their house that is affordable, it's quite sustainable. Some of them offer a pause option. And sometimes if you switch to a social tariff, the provider will waive the exit fees of transferring as well. And these range from about, I think they go as low as £12.50 a month, up to sort of £20, a lot of them around 15 mark. And I think there's 8 tariffs at the moment, including one mobile tariff in the UK. The problem with social tariffs at the moment is this very low uptake. There's a lot of different theories about why this is happening. About 3.2%, I think, in August was the last bit. So 3.2% of universal credit claimants in the UK are currently on a social tariff. That's up from January. Those stats are from August, Ofcom stats. And there is a kind of increasing uptake of this, but it's still very low. I think lots of people don't know about it. Lots of frontline workers don't know about it. Sometimes there's a concern about ringing up, that you might be persuaded into something that you don't want. There's a concern about switching, and if you're going to get an exit fee for coming out of your contract. And there's also some elements of unclear eligibility. It's not available to everyone who's claiming a benefit. Some people on pensioners credit are eligible, some aren't. It's a bit more complex. So there's all kinds of complexities around this. But I think social tariffs are a really strong way to identify people in the UK who need this support and get them the access they need. And it's a sustainable model of thinking about how we support people to access what is becoming a utility and a human right. So my scaling offers, and I know that there's a lot of debate around these as well. Step one would be awareness raising, so mandatory checks from telcos. If you ring up about your mobile phone, there could be a check process where someone says, "Are you claiming a benefit for the purposes of this? Do you want to talk about social tariffs?" You could also look at proactive methods of switching services. I know that there is a switching service in place, but it has some issues around network provider. Could that be universal? So the same way that you switch banks, you could do something for your broadband. And also, if you take this a step further, this could be something that we're auto-enrolled into, right? That if you claim a benefit, then you immediately are put onto a social tariff. There's been some really good examples in behavioural science of where that has been rolled out effectively across the country, organisation being one of them, your pension pot being another. And I think there's a real opportunity here to consider these. And a lovely example of how much this can save people money. So in Hammersmith and Fulham, the Age UK Internet Advice Service is manned by volunteers. And what they do is they work with individuals and they look at their bills, what they're paying. And sometimes they ring up on their behalf and say, and negotiate with a telecommunications company to bring their bill down. So Nelly was paying 100 quid a month. After they discovered she was on pensioners credit, that came down to £15 a month. And this is often caused by what's called a loyalty penalty. The longer you stay with a provider, the more money you often pay. Those prices increase over time. And loyalty penalties are another element of this wider ecosystem that we can be tackling. So lastly, the third one, we have community-led providers. So these are providers of network and internet infrastructure and internet services who are driven by the communities that they work in. So we've got wonderful examples of Wildernet in Cornwall and of Barn in Lancashire. And there's a couple in Scotland that I looked at as well. And what these are doing is offering network provision that isn't by the three bigger organisations that provide networks in the UK. So that's Openreach, Virgin Media O2 and City Fibre. And these alternative networks, some of them are very community focused. And what they're doing is providing a really high quality internet connection. Fibre has very high speeds and low latency in rural areas where it's hard to reach people. So we're thinking about farmers and fields, about villages that are quite far out and where it's not always commercially viable to get network provision from the bigger providers. I think in the wider ecosystem, what I found from this research is that these altnets, these community-led providers, offer a really important counterpoint to the bigger networks in this wider provision. And if we're thinking long-term into the future, supporting them through regulatory frameworks and ring-fencing procurement opportunities is a really good way to balance out the ecosystem and make sure that we bring people with us as we address the digital divide. You can see the day that I went to Lancashire, it wasn't quite so sunny. It was a bit cloudy that day. And I took a lovely picture of the cows in the field opposite Barn. There was such a welcoming community at Barn, and I was absolutely fascinated by the work that they've done. They've reached over 10,000 people and they have an incredibly strong offer. It's really high quality. And they talked particularly, we've got a quote here, it's been a lifeline for me during lockdown in particular. Reliable broadband service changes the way that some people around here are thinking about what they do. And the examples they gave was offering like glamping in farmers' fields and being able to digitize some of the ordering processes that they do in farmers, supply chain management and so on. Another great example was someone told me that their child was uploading homework at 11:30 p.m. every night because that was the only time they could get the speeds to upload it. And then after they got Barn, they were able to use it consistently with their family around them. So these rural areas, I think altnets and community providers are one of the best ways to tackle that issue. So just briefly, before we go on to reflections and Q&As, I just want to talk about the wider ecosystem. So zooming out of these brilliant communities. I believe personally that internet access is a collective responsibility across a complex ecosystem. There's a lot of goodwill in the sector, but there's also a lot of pointing. There's a lot of like industry pointing at government, government pointing at industry, communities pointing at wanting someone to take responsibility for this. I believe that the best way to get access is to take collective responsibility. And there's great examples of local authorities working with telcos and housing associations, of devolved governments doing incredible work in this space. And I think to get the access that we need, it needs to be collaborative and it needs to be a collective work together. I love this quote. That's from Helen Burrows at BT. There's loads of studies about the NHS and how it's going to become more efficient and digitized that completely gloss over the fact that 50% of their major users have never touched a computer. And what I'm getting at here and what the report goes into in some detail is that if we look at that periodic table of access, we're going to need, if we're digitizing those essential services, we're going to need internet access as a fundamental foundation of this. And there's a great quote from Darren Jones, who chairs Darren Jones, who chairs the APPG of data poverty, who talks about this kind of collective need to get access for all departments across government. And there are some detail for any policymakers in the room. There are some detailed recommendations that I encourage you to go and take a look at and see what you think. I think raising the profile of this need is really important because it's not just about online internet access. It's also about the wider impact that has on someone's life and whether they have access to services offline. I think we need a unified digital inclusion strategy. The current UK one is from 2014. It needs updating to fit with that digital strategy. I think there's an element of shifting structural responsibility, and I have some suggestions about ways that could be done. I think independent evidence is key. I think we know that if someone in rural Bristol wants to access an amazing tech job in London or central Bristol, they struggle to do that because of their internet access. We don't know how that's quantified, and we don't have independent studies that really outline that monetary figure. And I think if we knew the impact on the economic and productivity, if we knew those impacts in monetary terms, we'd have a better case for leveraging investment from central government. And then I also suggest that we look at community tariffs. This is looking particularly at care homes and at shared accommodation and providing people with really important private access. That's something that I think is key. But I say that the biggest thing I want to take away is that I think there is a collaborative, there's a lot of goodwill in the sector. There's a lot of collaboration going on. And what we need to do is maximize that and create more spaces, more collaboration spaces, and strong central leadership to build that out if we want to bridge the digital divide.